event where she spoke passionately and knowledgeably about her work and her important role as a community leader for her Give a Damn project in New South Wales. And it's awesome that she's able to make it here this evening. So I'm going to pass over to Taylor.
Thank you so much, Joel. Before I get started, Warami Miriga, Naya Yara Taylor, Naya Gundungurra Darug, Naya Nalua Nula, Tharawal Nura, Yanma Lalabila. Hello friends, my name is Taylor. I'm a Gundungurra and Darug woman. I live here on Tharawal country, and let's walk together. And before I really get going, to follow on from Joel's acknowledgement, I would like to acknowledge that this event is being hosted from the land of the Tharawal and Yuggera people. I acknowledge the elders of this land, past and present, and the young mob emerging as leaders in the community. I'd also like to acknowledge my own people and ancestors in New South Wales, the Gundungurra people whose spirit is with me and drives the work that I do. And wherever you are joining us from tonight, never forget that this is stolen land. Sovereignty has never been ceded, and when we take our next step forward, let us remember those who walked this sacred land before. As Joel said, I am from New South Wales. I have worked a little bit with UN, but this is really the first job I've done like this. I'm really excited to be here. Usually I work as a consultant on issues of Aboriginal culture and heritage, generally with local and state governments, most recently on the Give a Damn campaign, which isn't the subject of this event. If you want any more information, I'd recommend looking up the Give a Damn. I'm really, really excited. We've got a really good group of people for you to speak to today. I'm really excited to invite Tamika to introduce herself and kick us off.
Thank you so much, Taylor and Joel. My name is Tamika Sadler, and before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait and First Nations people all over the globe. For we are living, breathing existence of our people and our ancestors. And I also want to acknowledge how tough it has been for people of colour this week, especially with Reconciliation Week and Black Lives Matter and the deaths in custody that is going on continuously all around the globe. So yeah, my name is Tamika. I'm a proud Aboriginal, Torres Strait and South Sea Islander woman. I'm a mum to a beautiful baby boy called Iluka, and he's 1.5, currently watching Toy Story in the lounge room. I'm also the community organiser with Seed Mob, where we fight to protect country, and we're campaigning against Origin Energy with Don't Frack the NT. So that's just a little bit about me for now. I might pass it over to you, Taylor.
Need to unmute myself. Thank you for that, Tamika. The next person I would invite to introduce themselves, please, is Robus, please.
Thank you, Taylor. Kam na benan Melody arau Ropas o ngai kain kirpas. Hello, everybody. My name is Ropas, or Rob for short, and I'm hail from the islands of Kiribati in the Central Pacific. For those of you who have never heard of Kiribati before, that's okay. Not a lot of people have. If you draw a line from so-called Brisbane to Hawaii, you will find the beautiful islands of Kiribati in the middle of that line, right in the center of the Pacific, just north of Samoa and Fiji. I'm a recent graduate from UQ last year and currently working in health. And I am the assistant coordinator for the Pacific Climate Warriors Brisbane team. And I'll probably leave it at that for now, and we'll get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ami, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, thanks Joel and Taylor for having me on board with all this. I'm really happy to be here. But yeah, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which my home resides on, the Yuggera and Yugambeh people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So Mayam Nakamanali, my name is Aminata, or Ami for short. I'm Torres Strait Islander. My family comes from the islands of the islands of Mer, Arab, Ugar, and also the Kulkalgal nations of the Torres Strait. And I'm also from Senegal, which is in West Africa. So I'm also a recent graduate from the University of Queensland with a Bachelor of Social Science, and I'm currently doing a Master of Public Health in the areas of Indigenous health. So yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you so much. What I might do is ask questions to you, and feel free to jump in. I'm sure I can see there's so many different perspectives here, and I know I'm going to learn a lot. maybe starting with Tamika, could you please explain more to the audience about what you do and what impact it has on others?
Sorry, I missed that last bit, Taylor. What was the last question?
Sorry, can you explain to our audience what you do, which you've sort of introduced, and how it has an impact on others?
Perfect. No, that sounds great. So I work with Seed Mob, and if you don't know who Seed Mob are, it's the Seed Indigenous Youth Climate Network for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. So we work towards fighting for climate justice here within Australia, protecting our country and our sacred land. And so at the moment, we are campaigning against Origin Energy, and they are trying to frack the Northern Territory, in particular the Beetaloo Basin, where we all know at the moment the Northern Territory is on one water table. And so the dangers of fracking have a major impact on the people living in the Northern Territory, especially Aboriginal communities. And so because of this one tableland in the Northern Territory, if fracking wells fracking wells are run off with the extra water that happens from the wet season, that's when the polluted water will also sink into the land, destroy cultural sites, pollute the waterways, which in turn will also have a major impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's health. So yeah, that's what I do. I'm also studying a Bachelor of Environmental and Marine Science. I completely forgot to tell everybody. So yeah, it's, I guess what's inspired me to work within this field is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the oldest surviving culture. We knew the land is entwined with us, and you know, I think it's so important and it's so crucial now more than ever. In society, we're facing climate change, and you know, 10 years ago, climate change was just a debate to politicians and society, whereas now we have the facts and we have the science behind it. And I think now more than ever, First Nations people need to be able to put our sacred knowledge together and start saving our communities and our land and our culture, because at the end of the day, First Nations people were the ones that knew their land best. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I could go on forever.
Tamika, you were so inspiring. I'm sure most of us could listen to you speak forever, and I'm sure you've got a lot of stories from those experiences. I will ask you some more questions, but I just want to get more of a picture of where everyone's at. So if I could ask Robas, do you want to tell us more about the work that you do and the impact that it has?
For sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I am the assistant coordinator for the Pacific Climate Warriors Brisbane team. If you've never heard of the Pacific Climate Warriors, we are a network of young people working together in the fight against the fossil fuel industry, putting pressure on institutions to divest from fossil fuels and work towards a greener, cleaner future. Here in Australia, you'll find the Pacific Climate Warriors in major cities such as Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. We're also located in 14 of the Pacific Islands. Don't ask me which ones, because there's a lot. And we're growing in the USA as well. So the PCWs for short are across the globe, share our stories of how Pacific Island nations and its people are on the forefront of climate change, just like the Indigenous people of Australia are. Yeah, that's pretty much it. In my role specifically, I provide operational support to the organizing team, here in Brisbane to develop campaigns and events for things like community engagement and various actions, as well as collaborate with the other PCW teams around Australia and the Pacific to further our cause, further our voice. In doing so, I believe we create a safe space for young Pacific Islanders to share their lived experiences of climate change, offering a platform to foster and showcase their natural storytelling abilities, because we are great storytellers, and making sure that their voices are heard, because not a lot of times do we get the opportunity to be heard.
Thank you so much. And Ami, do you want to tell us more about what you do and what impact it has on others?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not as deadly as Tamika and Robati. They're great young leaders in our community. So I guess I'm coming more from like the student perspective, and just being like a young professional and an Indigenous woman in these spaces, like whether that's with SEED or 350 Climate Pacific. Sorry, I think I got that wrong. And yeah, just other groups in general. So I've been lucky, like, I guess, with the studies that I do to assist like some very deadly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander scholars who do research in issues regarding Indigenous health. That's eventually where I want to end up. So I think what I'm bringing today is basically like discussing how being an active part of your community is important. So you can be a student, you can be studying, but there are still ways to be involved and to be active in your communities. And I think I embody that to an extent. So I think like it's, sorry. Yeah, so basically, just with studying and whatnot, I think it's important, like when you're a student, that you need to be putting into practice the skills that you're learning. It's not enough to just be at uni, you know, especially if you're in the humanities, like you're in social science or you're in anthropology or politics, philosophy, and stuff like that, and you're not actively involved in the community. So I think a lot of people are in my position where they might be a student or they might be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, but they don't know how to get involved. And so I think the way that I've tried to do it is just staying connected to the community in Meanjin, or also known as Brisbane, because it's integral to, you know, broadening my knowledge and my understanding of the issues and concerns that are in my community. So yeah, I plan to go into Indigenous research, so I can't enter these spaces and try to conduct research or make change without actively working with people of those communities and hearing their stories. So that's sort of the perspective I'll be bringing.
I love that perspective, and it actually goes really well into the next question. I imagine we're being joined by a lot of young people, you know, students, university students, and I know that's something that I struggled with, and that's why I've changed my degree, is trying to find a practical application and giving back to my community. So I'll put this question to all of you. Just answer as you feel free. It'd be great if it could be like a conversation, because as Robati said, we're storytellers. So if you had any advice for a young person who felt passionate about a particular issue, whether it be what we've spoken about or maybe health system equity or anything else, how would you suggest they work with others and collaborate and mobilize people? It's a big question, and I'm sorry.
It is a big question, and
Yeah.
I honestly do not have all the answers right now, so I will definitely throw the conversation. But I think, you know, if you are a young person that is passionate about change, like the society we live in today, and with the pandemic that's gone on, the power of social media and technology connects us all around the globe. And, you know, it's a really great space if we use it in a positive light to be able to spread awareness within our communities. Like, for example, this week, I'm sure a lot of people that are on this call right now have seen a lot of posts about Black Lives Matter. And it's great while everybody is posting about Black Lives Matter, but also people need to acknowledge the privilege that they have, but also have a look that's in their own backyard. So the power of social media, that's where you'll find your community.
Yeah, I think if I was just to add on to that, yeah, it's really just that simple. Reach out. If you feel like there's something calling you to action, just reach out. If you're here today as a participant and you feel moved by anything that we say, either like, you know, message the UNAA Peace Society, Seed Mob, myself at Pacific Climate Warriors, or even just make a movement yourself. It really, you don't have to do anything grand. If you're maybe, I don't know, too shy, too scared to step up, bring a friend. We have so many events and actions that happen within a year. Albeit it's a little bit hard now with COVID and everything's online, but when we do have our actions, come. We're more than happy to have you there. Listen to our stories, listen to our struggles, and then maybe you can even help us. We don't know. We have a couple of, or more than a couple of people in our Pacific Climate Warrior teams across the Pacific and in Australia that literally only heard about us through social media, like Tamika said. So they saw maybe a post, a video, and then they just asked to join, to come along, and that they've been in it since they've asked. So it does come from you. If you want to be a part of something, you're gonna have to step up and be in it. So that's all I'd really have to add to that.
Yeah, so I think firstly, you have to actually want to be involved. You have to be passionate. No one's going to force you. No one's going to drag you. You have to want to be there, and you have to want to be a part of it. It's not up to me. It's not up to us to convince you of Indigenous people's humanity or people of colour's humanity or anyone else who's vulnerable in Australia. Whether we're trying to combat issues of Black deaths in custody or land rights or closing down of Aboriginal communities. The best way to be involved is to be present at community events and initiatives. Don't just come for NAIDOC week and Invasion Day rally and then call it a day. What's that going to do? Be consistent in the struggle. The movement is ongoing until justice is served. And the movement has been carried by our elders and our ancestors for a long time. And now our young people like Tamika, Robas, Ruby, they're people that are taking the reins and leading the way forward. We're all busy. I'm busy. No one's busier than each other. Like, you actually have to make it a priority and fit that into your schedule if your passion for human rights is actually genuine. So yeah, and also I'll just probably add, you don't have to be, there's different ways to be affiliated and to be doing something. You don't have to be necessarily like a leader or a holding a position in an organization or a social activist group. Just coming along and being present is symbolic, and it means a lot. It's showing solidarity. So that's sort of like the best way that you can come. You have to want it. No one's going to tell you to. So yeah.
That was a really great point, and I just wanted to extend on the point that Ami just made, that actually a couple of you have sort of said it, that you might not feel like you can step into these spaces. You might be shy, you might have skills that don't necessarily feel like they lend themselves to these movements, but these movements do need all sorts of people. Everyone has something to give, and standing beside us is I would say one of the most important things that you can do, and standing beside us is the best way to learn. Also, in line with the Black Lives Matter conversation this week, we're under a lot of stress as Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people in this space at the moment, and honestly, this is very traumatizing. And a lot of these campaigns and movements that we are working with are very stressful and traumatizing. At some point, I speak from my own experience, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, it's very hard being the only cultural resource. I don't have all the answers, and I know none of you guys have all the answers. Sometimes it's your responsibility as an ally to do your own research. That's my addition to that. I would also ask, on behalf of maybe some people who are joining us who don't know how to approach these spaces, especially, for example, movements around Black Lives Matter, even Invasion Day. Do you have any advice for people who might feel uncomfortable attending in our spaces as white people?
Yeah, like I keep saying as well, definitely acknowledge your privilege and take a time to understand the person of colour or a First Nations person's perspective and get to know them from a genuine sense. I see a lot of white people use people of colour and First Nations people as tokenistic. And I think it's really important that you come from a genuine space and you really want to be able to implement, their stories with your life and be able to create change within your own life. So, for example, I have a lot of friends that are white and that have children as well. And because I'm raising a Black son and I want him to grow up being proud of his culture and have a strong cultural identity, I want him to not feel the repercussions of racism like I felt when I was growing up. And I think it's really important that, the community that we surround ourselves in are trying super hard to be able to implement those changes and stop racism, because racism is taught at home. It's not something that you're just born with, and you know, that's your mind frame forever. Yeah, did you guys want to speak to that?
I think you covered that really well. I think if I was to add anything, I think I'm just going to quickly touch on something that Ami mentioned before, was saying how if you wanted to be a part of this, and it sort of does relate to your question, Taylor, but if you do want to come to our events and things like that, or just any sort of social movement, but yeah, you don't have to be in these leading roles or anything. It reminded me of a Samoan word, tautua, which sort of, in a nutshell, means to live out, to lead is to serve. So you don't have to lead in order to show leadership. You can show leadership through other means, whether it's packing up chairs at an event or just really small things that go a long way to make the process a lot easier for us as, you know, in these positions where we do have to sort of carry out our jobs. But yeah, no, I think I'll let Ami speak on this as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's pretty much what all of you guys have said. But yeah, definitely the best way to mobilize with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and gain respect, trust, and credibility is to volunteer at community events and lend a helping hand. Like every time I went to Torres Strait Islander events or functions, whether that was July 1 or like a tombstone opening or something, my mum and my older sister were in the back helping out in the kitchen. You know, and then as I got older, I had to do that as well. They were serving the elders water or food. They were cleaning up after events. So sometimes we'd leave those functions at midnight or 1 a.m. because my mum would be helping clean up the hall and packing away the tables and giving the elders a lift home. That's what community means for us for Indigenous people and for people of colour as well. That's how we do things. So you don't get paid for that. You don't get recognition for that. And those tasks might seem below you, but that's what will bring you closer to our communities. When we can see that you care and that you can be a community-minded person. And so I think I really need to reiterate as a student, especially if you're studying humanities in the discipline, you can't just rely on your academic achievements and your accolades to give you access to our spaces and to our community. We respect you, but no one cares if you're not actively involved in the community as well. You must walk the talk, and that will gain you the respect and the trust of those Indigenous people and those of us already in the grassroots community. So being a social activist online isn't enough. Your whole being needs to encompass that. And that goes for people of colour as well, and Indigenous people too, who aren't involved at all in any aspect of their community. We have to do it too. So something that my great-grandfather, Swaney Morsu, said, which is also in my mum's book, he said, when you do something for others, always remember to do it from your heart or don't bother at all.
I seriously love that so much. And I'd love to read that book as a side note. I'd like to talk to you about that afterwards. I'd like to ask a question directed more to Robati and Tamika's experiences. Can you talk to us more about how the work of the Pacific Climate Warriors and Seed Mob express cultural experiences and tell the stories of the realities faced from climate change?
That's a big one. Definitely. Wow. So the realities are, like, first of all, sovereignty never ceded here in Australia. And thank you to somebody that shouted out my t-shirt. My partner has a business called Take Pride Movement. Sorry, not going to talk about that now. But Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, like, we lived a harmonious life pre-colonisation and still do since colonisation. And it's the injustices that we've faced towards our people, our land, our culture and our communities is definitely like what has shaped Seed, fighting for climate justice and the fossil fuel industry. And as you guys probably have seen earlier on, the start of Reconciliation Week, Rio Tinto destroyed a 60,000-year-old sacred site over in the Pilbara in WA. And this is what we see day in and day out of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. People coming in to exploit their land, with no incentives given back to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The only incentive is that you're going to get economic growth and sustainable jobs, which we all know the mining industry does not provide sustainable jobs for our people. And the only time that the mining industry does provide jobs for our people is a tokenistic value to align with their reconciliation action plans or to meet their KPIs for end of financial year, financial income streams. And so our people have had this connection to our land since forever. Like, we go back and we look at our Dreamtime stories, for example, the creation of our lands. Like, and I think as well, one thing that Australian society just does not understand, or they just do not care to understand, is that Australia is made up of all these different nations. So, I'm here on the Sunshine Coast, which is Kabi Kabi and Gubbi Gubbi land, whereas, somebody else could be in New South Wales, somebody else could be in WA, and we see the exploitation of the fossil fuel industry. And that has an impact on all of us, not just the people in that community, but Australia and also the world as a whole. And I want to see a sustainable future, not just for me, but for the next generations. And that's what SEED is providing, is a gateway for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to fight for their communities, to fight for our land and climate justice, and to be able to have a harmonious life, but also a sustainable future at the end of the day. Like, we have so many great resources that can be implemented as renewable energy. Australia is just, so far behind, but I might leave that up to Rob if you want to have a yarn.
Oh my God, I love listening to everything that SEED is always doing. They always inspire me, and they also inspire a lot of what PCW aim to do as well. That's awesome. Can I really quickly, Taylor, please, can you just repeat the question for me, if that's all right?
Yeah, of course it is.
Thank you.
I was asking around your experience with the Pacific Climate Warriors. Can you talk to us about how that work expresses cultural experiences and tells the stories of the realities faced from climate change?
Yeah. So for a lot of us as Pacific Climate Warriors, or just as us as Pacific Islanders, full stop, we dread the day that our islands won't exist anymore, purely because of the devastation of climate change, the devastation of colonialism. And yet the effects of the fossil fuel industry have a direct negative effect on our lands. Because of the sea level rise that is an effect of climate change, families are having to move inland from the shores. Entire communities are being displaced. And for those not familiar with our ways of life, we live off the land, we live off the sea, and we live off this balance between land and sea. So when we see this imbalance where the sea is creeping up on our land, creeping up on where we live, we know that something's not right. And we know that we're not to blame for it because we don't have the largest gas emissions in the world. We contribute barely anything to it. And the fact that we are on the forefront of these climate effects really is just really devastating. And our cultural identity, our cultural practices, and our sense of being are connected to the land. So when our land is being eaten away by the sea, so is our identity. Our work as the Pacific Climate Warriors is rooted in our stories and our cultures, as well as our understanding of who we are and our love of our island homes. When we show up to tell our stories, we do it in a way that makes sense to us, and it's unapologetically Pacifica. Whether that's through dance, through song, through poetry, our storytelling is unique and resilient. And yeah, I think that sort of speaks to how we operate sort of as an organization and how we operate as people, because we are very relationship driven. We love to connect to people through our stories and through our relationships.
Just as a side note, I love you guys. This is so inspiring, and hearing these stories and these experiences. I don't know if you guys feel this way. I'm not part of an organization, so I don't generally have people around me having these same experiences, but it's so heartening to know that I'm not alone in this, and I'm sure we've all felt that way. The next question is something that I'm very interested in. It is a question for all three of you, is what do you find to be the most challenging part of your work? And do you have any idea of how this can be overcome, or how have you overcome it? Also might be a big one.
I think I might just quickly jump in at the start. I think mainly working within this space, I'm still really new. I've only been in this maybe about 3 years within the climate movement space. But I think one main issue that is recurring is sort of maintaining momentum. And that's momentum in like the way we deliver our campaigns or our events, especially during these times of COVID. It's been really difficult to just transfer all our movements online. But as Tamika said before, we're living in a social media age where it's so easy to reach out through the internet, through Instagram, through Facebook, things like that. And it's just a way of thinking outside of the box, I guess, just being more creative with how we look at getting our message out there. And so just recently, during, I believe it was International Mother Earth Day, the Pacific Climate Warriors Brisbane team sort of sent out a coloring book. And in the coloring book, we had stills of powerful Pacific Climate Warriors, and they came from a video that we had put out last year for, I can't remember now, I think it was for it was some big event. I can't remember it. If anyone can put it in the chat, that would be awesome. Yeah, and so we put out this video just in response to that. And it was just an easy way for us to connect to families, because it would be an intergenerational conversation where we would be able to engage with parents and with their children through a coloring book to talk about something that affects us all. So yeah, I think it's just coming up with new creative ideas to maintain our momentum.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with what you've said, like creative ways and thinking outside the box. But I think as well, like touching on like the momentum, it can be super overwhelming to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and First Nations people, the impacts of climate change. And just having that constant stress in the back of your mind that, you know, country or your island home is going to be destroyed or exploited by either the fossil fuel industry or the impacts of, you know, colonization and all that sort of thing. And I think as well, like we have to acknowledge the eco-anxiety that people face as well. And, you know, with the conversation of climate change, it's only just started being a norm, I've found, like like these day and ages, because you look back at, say, your parents' age, and climate change wasn't something at the forefront of their minds. It was just a simple debate. Nobody knew if it was true or false. Whereas we're seeing the impacts of it now, and the young people that are coming up, the next generation, they're facing those, you know, anxieties and repercussions of what we have done pretty much. And, you know, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. They're not going to be able to go out to country and see these sacred sites. They might just only learn from it in a textbook. Like we have so many extinct flora and fauna, like here in Australia, but I'm sure all over the world. And, you know, that is such a burden and a stress to a young person. And I think it's so important now that, you know, we have Pacific Climate Warriors and SEED and other youth climate networks that are able to support these young people through this movement, understand why this is happening and how we can fight against it and create a sustainable future for the next generation.
Yes, I think I definitely agree with everything that Robati and Tamika said. I think one of the other challenges is when we think of like social activism and the different movements that are happening in Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne, it's very fragmented. So there's so many different groups fighting for equality and justice, but not realizing that the majority of our issues, whether that's climate change, land rights, asylum seeker or refugee issues, they're all tied to the same overarching structure, which is white supremacy and capitalism. So, you know, sometimes it can be difficult with trying to get those groups to sort of see that the goal is quite similar. And so a lot of the time climate change activists don't understand how Indigenous land right movements are also tied to the climate change struggle. Like, we're fighting for the same thing. We have 20,000 people that will show up in Brisbane for climate change rallies put on by Extinction Rebellion. But when Indigenous people march for land rights, where the hell are they? So, you know, having numbers in any social movement is critical. So it is about keeping momentum, like Robati and Tamika were saying. So Aboriginal people's fight is tied to that. So the challenge that I see is about how we all bring those groups together to work towards the same goal, because it ultimately benefits all of us.
Thank you so much. I agree with all three of you, of course. I have my own experiences of people not exactly understanding how all of this fits together, and the worst of that has been at the climate strikes in Sydney. People asking why groups like SEED would have a presence there, or why I would walk in wearing, you know, traditional wear, because they don't see that as an issue or see that as a connected issue, and that's very frustrating. If I could just add one more thought from my own experience, is that I think the most challenging aspect of my work is coming to the table with my own cultural knowledge and understanding, and time again being put in the too hard basket, because it's hard to go out and visit elders, and you have to go out and visit elders. You don't bring them in, you don't, you know, make them come to you. Trying to communicate that cultural protocol for people I work with and for has been very frustrating for me. And again, something I think we could all have experienced. And this is all very frustrating. I think all activists and change makers do feel that frustration with the way things are, and the system that we're working within, as Ami said, within capitalism. Do you guys have any advice on how, in light of this frustration and its possible impact on mental health, how individuals might be able to practice good mental health and emotional health despite this eco-anxiety and this frustration with the system? I'm happy to repeat that. I realized that was very wordy.
Well, yeah, like, as you know, the globe has gone in a pandemic and we've had lockdowns, like, and restrictions. A lot of people were starting to just take hikes and like take time in nature to be able to calm down from, you know, the everyday stresses of the news and what society is bringing to the forefront of our minds. And you know, whilst that was a really great thing that people are going out and spending time in nature and being able to connect and be present in that moment, it's still very shallow in a sense. You know, the only reason why people were being able to connect to nature and go outside was because people were given restrictions. So I find as well, like, I think people really have to think deeply about like the environment and the spaces that they're in, and acknowledge, like, you know, what am I producing to either implement climate change, or what am I like doing to stop climate change from happening? And it can be so simple, like simple steps that can be implemented in everyone's daily lives. And I think as well, touching on the eco-anxiety, like, it's really important to be able to take time for yourself. And you know, it's easier said than done, self-care and practice, you know, self-love and self-affirmation and things like that. But, you know, as we all know, we live
Sorry, I believe we've lost Tamika. Do Ami or Robas want to jump in with that?
Yeah, you go.
Okay, sorry, Ami. Yeah, no, that is a really tough question. I can only really speak from my own experience. I'm no a professional, so I can't really give any advice. But from my own experience, what I tend to do is to tap into culture. And I know that is a privilege that isn't afforded to everybody. But it is something that has helped me a lot. Whether that's just it can come in many forms, but yeah, it's just tapping into my culture. It really grounds me, and it reminds me of my roots, why I'm in this in the beginning, why I decided to join the movement, and why I continue to fight and get our voices heard. We have our own sort of practices within Pacific Climate, whereas Brisbane team, we tend to check in a lot with each other. We are very relationship driven people, so we're always checking, like, you're right, you good, you sure? All right, cool. But yeah, and we just make sure that everyone feels that it is safe enough for them to express, whether, even if it's their own anxiety within the team, like if they're having a lot being thrust upon them, then we're more than happy to take on some of the load. Like, it's just little things like that can go a long way. But yeah, no, I can really only speak on my own experiences for that.
Thank you, Robas. I will just quickly throw back to Tamika, who got cut off at the end, if you want to continue. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think my internet froze. But whereabouts did you guys get up to? That's all right. I'll wing it because I can talk underwater. Anywho, as well, like touching on eco-anxiety and you know, the impacts of COVID-19 and the restrictions put on everybody. And I think it's really important that, you know, people are really genuine about how they look after their health and well-being. And now more than ever, like, it's a time where health and well-being should be at the forefront, as well as climate change, of everybody's mind. And you know, being able to check in with people shouldn't be something that you're ashamed of, and being able to talk about your health and well-being is something that, you know, people should feel comfortable being able to reach out, and it should be a norm. And I think it's really important, you know, now more than ever, that we are a community and we are, you know, helping each other through these challenges and obstacles, because, you know,
Uh-oh. Army, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think it's definitely hard for all of us, you know, especially obviously Indigenous people and people of colour. And I think also because of social media, we're constantly being fed negative news and stories of pain, of suffering, of death, of injustice, and it can be a lot to process and to grapple with. And I've often felt upset and angry and hopeless and like I couldn't do anything. But I think the valuable lesson that I learned as I've gotten older is that a key part of protecting your mental health and your emotional well-being is to observe and not to absorb. So be aware, keep up to date with the news, read articles, but don't absorb it to the point where it's affecting you in an unhealthy way. Obviously that's really hard, and we always slide back, and it takes a lot to be able to get to that sort of that stage. But that comes with learning how to regulate your emotions and how you react when a piece of news or information is presented to you. So don't get caught up in the hysteria. Just acknowledge it for what it is and use it as motivation to keep up your fight in the movement and towards a better future, especially if you're Indigenous or a person of colour, where these things are just our lived reality. So we always have to take extra care in how we engage with bad news. So it's something that you have to practice and you'll get better at it.
Again, sorry. I said thank you to all three of you. And Tamika, I'm sorry you got cut off again. Is there anything else you wanted to chuck on before we go to the next question?
That's totally fine.
Awkward. The next question I have for you guys, we've sort of talked about a little bit in passing, is how do you think COVID-19 has impacted people's mindsets and the choices they've made in regards to their consumption and their sort of choices? And do you think this is going to change in the coming months?
Yes, I have been talking to my partner so much about this. You know, I'm sure everybody here has seen everybody go into panic mode, especially in local shopping centres, with a lot of resources being out of stock, which was absolutely ridiculous. But I think in light of that, a lot of people found time to start slowing down and to be able to start being able to rely on themselves. So I have seen a lot of people growing their own veggie gardens, their own herbs, which is amazing. Like that is, a step in the right direction, which is really great. But I think as well, in light of, COVID-19 and how it's also impacting climate change, it's also that really fine line where everybody is going through a global pandemic. There is a lot of trauma that everybody is processing at the same time. So I think, it's important to acknowledge, what's going on with the pandemic and climate change in general. But I think it's also important that people start setting their own boundaries and not putting so much pressure on themselves as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important what Tamika just spoke on, like watching through the early stages of the pandemic here in Australia. It was insane to watch, like just seeing all the hysteria in the shopping centers and everything like that, ridiculous. But in saying that, I did see a lot of, especially within Pacific Island communities, where our elders weren't able to go out into the shopping centers because one, they didn't feel safe. Two, they were worried that they might have, because they have their own health issues, they didn't want to be caught up in it. We saw young, able-bodied people going out and buying their groceries and sending it to their houses, leaving it out the front of their doors. And they were coming up with really solution-based solutions. Wow, that was really good. But yeah, you know what I mean? How even though amidst all of that panic and hysteria, we were still able to figure out a way to come together as a community, as we know that we do best. And I think as well, another point is through this COVID-19 pandemic, it's given us a time to sort of, for lack of a better term, marinate in how we do practice our consumerism and what we individually go out and do, what we go out and buy. And it's given us time to be more mindful of that. And I think that out of anything, that's one positive, I guess. But yeah, I'll let Ami speak as well.
I feel like I don't have much to say on this, but I think, I definitely think with COVID-19, there has been a shift in people's mentality. Obviously not everywhere, but I feel like, people have had time to reflect and to be at home and to just be still. We're so used to working in an environment that is just like, we're constantly busy, we're constantly doing something. The ideals of capitalism, that we're always going to be productive, otherwise you're not valuable, you're not a valuable contributor to society, So it's been interesting to just see everyone at home and how society still goes on, things still go on, we don't have to live the way that we were before. Things can still change drastically. That's probably all that I have to say about that one. Sorry.
Thank you so much to all of you. Now we've sort of gotten to the end of our Q&A, but this comes into a more interactive part of the webinar with the audience. So before I throw to the general question and answer, I would ask people who are watching if you could please type into the chat where you're from and whose country you're on. And if you don't know, find out. So to the panel, this is a general question to all of you. Jump in where you feel like it. What are your views on constitutional recognition and representation in Parliament for Indigenous people in Australia?
I'm going to allow this time for Tamika and Ami to speak on that. I'll give them the space to talk on it.
Tamika, take it away.
Oh, goodness, I was hoping you would. That's so okay. So I'll just read the question again. It was, what are your views on constitutional recognition or designation representation in Parliament for Indigenous people in Australia? Wow. I am sure a lot of you guys that are on the call might have done some Googling and that sort of thing on First Nations people's recognition here in Australia. You know, our fight for land rights, our fight for treaty, and also a campaign that's also running at the moment, Uluru Statement from the Heart. I think at the forefront of this is just the lack of consultation for all of the nations here in Australia, and our elders, our ancestors that have passed on, and what our wishes are for our nations. So I think it's really, really tough to be able to speak on, you know, recognition here in Australia, because it's so different for each person. And I think, you know, there's no one right way to go about it. I think it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of genuine consultation and communication with the government, with our community, with our elders. So it's definitely going to be an interesting journey, but it's something that I definitely want to see in my lifetime anyway. What about you, Yami?
Well, damn, how do I follow that? That was good. Honestly, I'm not sure what constitutional recognition looks like. Like, that's my only issue, and it's definitely something that a lot of Indigenous people don't necessarily agree on. Like, there are opinions from all over the spectrum, so it's really hard to just like pinpoint and say which direction we'll eventually go into. It's a hard task, but I'm not sure if constitutional recognition is the way, but maybe having our own government and, you know, our own sovereignty, and where we can decide for ourselves what is best for our people, what is best for our community. And like Tamika was saying, consultation, like most of the time that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen in an appropriate way where we are, you know, engaging with elders and, you know, community leaders and stuff like that to find out what the actual issues are. So I think my concern with constitutional recognition is, what does it look like? Who's controlling it? There's just many questions about it, but it's not really my area on stuff, sorry. But that's sort of my own personal opinion about constitutional recognition.
Thank you guys for your answers, and I do think it is a good question, and you touched on a really vital point, both of you, that people don't agree, and it needs to be an ongoing discussion with mob. I know my own concerns with it have been, who is deciding what that looks like. I see, honestly, a lot of people driving it who don't know much about culture and don't work with Aboriginal communities. I think it needs to be driven by First Nations communities, and that should be self-explanatory. Something that we've all talked about before, and I really think ties really well into this question, is do you have any insight on getting different groups and people with differing perspectives to unite and work towards a common goal?
What did you mean by insight? Like,
maybe you could talk about, if you've come across this in the past, what strategies you had used, or what had worked or what hadn't worked in getting people from different groups to work together?
I think from an angle where, if you're like sort of if you want to engage with, for example, the Pacific Climate Warriors, I'll speak on that since that's what I know. We are Pacific Islanders, and we love to know where you're from, what you're about, and we just want to get to know you before we want to know what your intent is. I think it's really important, first of all, to build genuine, authentic relationships with organizations like Seed Mob, organizations like Pacific Climate Warriors, so that we are all understanding and that we know that we're not being tokenized for just a small gain within whatever you want to do. And I think it'll be, at the end of the day, when we are on the same page and we know what both of our goals are in terms of our movements, then I think it'll be a stronger message as well. So I think it's just, if you want to collaborate, get to know us first.
100%. And I think, you have to be super genuine, and you have to trust that process as well. Like, you can't force something that isn't there, as well. And I think, you should go into it with your whole heart, with the right intentions, but also be open to, it might not work out in, your common goal that you wanted to achieve as well. So I think it's really important to go in with an open mind and, to be willing to learn from that experience as well.
I think, it's definitely, when you're gonna like connect with other groups or Indigenous groups or people of colour groups, like you do have to come with good intentions, and you do have to be open to learning, and that goes both ways. I'm not saying that it's just everyone else has to just respect Indigenous people, and it's a reciprocal relationship. We have to be open to other cultures as well, and open to learning about them and their histories and their experiences. Some other people come from other places, third world countries and other things, where they've experienced some sort of injustice and stuff like that. So it's about finding the commonalities, like what are our similarities, and that's how we can work together to reaching the same goal. And you also, when you're coming into those spaces, whatever space it is, you have to ask yourself, like, who am I as a person? Where do I come from? How does my background and my worldview influence the way that I think? And how does that impact the space that I'm in? So it's also a lot of like self-reflection, and definitely myself, like being from two cultures, I'm African as well. I like to have conversations with my African friends about, Indigenous struggles here, and Pacifica things as well, especially with climate change and all that. And it's a conversation that you always have to have and keep going. It's about like planting the seed. People might not necessarily agree with you straight away or understand your point of view, but you can just say little things, drop little hints here and there over the months, over the years, and then next thing you know, they're with you at the march, or that they're with you at the community event. And it's been so nice to see how much like other people of colour groups have come together to like support one another, especially with Seed Mob and Pacific Climate Warriors, like two groups coming together and working on the goal together. Like a few years ago, maybe like 10 years ago or 7 years ago, that wasn't like a thing. We weren't doing that sort of stuff. It was very much more fragmented. So it's nice to see different people in our spaces.
Thank you so much. My next question, in line with kind of everything we've been talking about, because I really think it's the bottom line of what we're all fighting for, I would ask you, what is justice, and how is justice going to be achieved? Do you think it's going to be a tangible moment and we'll be able to notice it, or do you think it'll be different in different places?
That's such a big question, and it's like such a crazy week as well. And I think it's a great question though. I do love that, and I'm really glad we're talking about it, because justice isn't just about equality. There needs to be equity within that, and we can see the impacts of injustice here in Australia, with Black deaths in Australia happening, not just over in America, not just over the world. Like, we see our land rights being taken off us. It's not just overseas, it's here in our own country. And I think to be able to achieve justice, our society needs to be able to work towards a common goal, and we need to be able to use our voices and our power, and we need to unite together and stand for truth, stand for equality, we stand for equity, stand for peace and harmony. And I think You know, it's so crazy, the world that we're living in, the power of social media and how negative and positive media is comprehended by individuals in society, and just the power that individuals in society can have. And that is such a scary thing for Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people, people of colour and First Nations people over the world. And again, white supremacy, like, it's something that white people need to acknowledge is their privilege, and to be able to walk with us and unite with us for that common goal. And justice will come. It is a day that is going to come. You know, I'm sure you guys may have seen, I heard on the radio when I was driving home that the police officer was charged with murder and manslaughter for George Floyd. And, you know, whilst that is justice, that is still not enough for people of colour. That is still not enough for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia. And, you know, it's really important that people start looking at the injustices that minorities are facing and educate themselves before doing anything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely a long way from justice, but we can also acknowledge the things that we have achieved, and the other forms of justice that we have achieved in the past as well. So that gives us hope as well to keep going and knowing that things can eventually get better one day. But I think in bringing about justice, you really have to uplift the voices of those you're fighting for, especially if you're an ally. That means stepping back, that means listening, that means giving us space, that means having humility, that means validating our knowledge systems and dismantling the colonial narratives that have for so long been, you know, told by white colonial powers in Australia. The reason why people think they can frack on traditional Aboriginal lands and why there's been little efforts in, you know, combating rising sea levels in the Torres Strait is because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are not seen as valuable contributors to society, and that's rooted in racism. It's related to colonial narratives which have long-lasting impacts. So the challenge is that we don't focus enough on changing the dialogue. So there's different ways that we need to be fighting for justice, and dialogue is so imperative, and it gets overlooked because dialogue is what it's what makes people have certain views about things. Like if you're talking a specific way about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people all the time, people are going to start to believe that and think that. And you will notice that sometimes when maybe migrants or, you know, immigrants come to Australia and stuff like that, sometimes they tend to adopt the narrative, the white narrative that has been made up about us. So, you know, there's different, it's going to be a while till we get to justice, but I think definitely changing dialogue is a step in the right directions. Like we have to, you know, yeah, that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Wow, like heavy, like what these two strong women have been just talking about right now is incredible. And I just want to give everyone the moment to sort of process everything they've been saying, because my mind is going 100 million hours a minute. Yeah, no, I appreciate that they've sort of touched on the overarching theme of justice, and it is going to take a while, but I guess to sort of hone in on what justice might look like for me as an individual, as someone whose family is directly affected by by climate change. Justice to me looks like not having to worry about picking up my grandma's bones from the grave because this rising sea levels are washing away burial sites. That's what justice looks like to me, is me not having to worry about that, me not having my family having to worry about that. But then I also understand that on the other side of that is the fossil fuel industry. And there are people with jobs in the fossil fuel industry, and their main concern is job security, making sure that they're providing for their family as well. And I think our goal as Pacific Climate Warriors is to make sure that this transition to a cleaner, greener future is just. And that means just on both sides, on all sides. what that might look like for those with jobs in the fossil fuel industry or within mining or things like that, is making sure that they're able to transition to other jobs with security to make sure that they're also providing for their families. So yeah, it's just, not everything is one-sided. I understand that there's different narratives being told, but justice doesn't have one sort of look. Yeah, I think that's all I can really say.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Robus, I would ask you to go on from what you were just saying to our next question. It ties in really well with what you're talking about, with your concerns about sea rising in your community and what that's going to mean for you and your family, of course. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what some of your communities are facing as they're being affected by rising sea levels?
Yeah, sure. So just off the top of my head, like, rising sea levels caused by climate change affects the entire, every single island nation of the Pacific. For Kiribati, it looks like houses being washed away, burial sites being washed away, and families having to pick up the remains of their family members that have passed. And that can be really traumatic for them because they're trying to rest, and then they have to go through a whole nother grieving process again to try and bury them again. That's just one small point as well. Sorry, not small point, but one small piece of that puzzle. And then for other island nations, it's salinity in the soil. They can't grow crops. They're not able to sustainably grow produce. So they've had to resort to buying stuff from the stores, and it's just not a way that we've been accustomed to. We're having to adopt the Western way of living, which is buying food from the stores and not having to live off the land or off the oceans that we have been doing for thousands of years. And we want to continue to do that. We don't want to have to rely on things being imported. In Kiribati, we don't have clean drinking water. The water that we have, even rainwater, we have to make sure that it's properly sanitized and clean. But all our water comes imported from Australia. And it's just not a way that we want to live. And that's mainly due to, because of the rising sea levels, it's infiltrating our freshwater reservoirs, and it's just not able to be drunk anymore. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening within the Pacific. If you want to know more, please go and do your research or reach out. Yeah, we'd be happy to fill in any sort of gaps that you want to know more about, but there is a lot. And I could talk on about it more, but yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Robus. My next question is for Tamika regarding the Beetaloo Basin fracking. Are you finding any major differences between the consultation that is happening between the proponents and the native title holders, and what the broader community might be fighting for?
To be honest, I don't know much that is going on with native title holders in the Beetaloo Basin, and you know, the consultation process with Origin Energy and fracking. From my experiences, Origin Energy have been very sly and conniving when you know, consulting with community members and being able to you know, find members and, like, you know, start what is the word? Having families fight against each other over the fracking in their local communities and on their country. To be honest, that's still an ongoing process as well. So I can't talk much to that, but hopefully in the near future, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I understand that's a complicated process, and I really appreciate your insight into that. Can you talk, all of you, about what you see is the biggest way that current discussions and actions around climate change can benefit from Indigenous perspectives?
First Nations people are always first and worst impacted by climate change. And so, you know, whilst we are in a time where the climate movement is at the forefront of everyone's mind. You know, people that are holding space within the climate movement should always acknowledge First Nations people, and always have First Nations people talk about their experiences of climate change and the injustice of climate change that is happening to our nations and to their country. And I think it's really important to really like hone in on this as well, because over the years, you know, there have been major protests, rallies and actions talking about climate change by inspiring and empowering young people. But our voices are always either not there or pushed to the side. And yeah, it's so important, you know, if you're fighting for climate change, you're also fighting for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land rights as well. And you should always be able to put that platform there for First Nations people first. Yeah, did you guys want to talk about that more?
Yeah, I think it's an important point you brought up, was making sure that we're given the platform. A lot of the times we see is, excuse me, is people talking for us. Don't do that. Number one, I will come find you and I will punch you in your face. No, I'm kidding. Is pass us the mic. Let us talk for ourselves. Let us share our stories and our experiences. This fight isn't new. We've been fighting, we've been resisting for a very long time, years. And even our aunties, our uncles, our generations above us have been fighting the same fight that we're still fighting today. And it gets frustrating when we see people going, oh, I'm speaking for these people that can't speak for themselves. No, we definitely can. We definitely can. We have voices and we will use them. Pass us the mic and let us speak. Give us the platform that we're not afforded, that you are given on a silver platter. And we will tell you how it is, and we'll let you know firsthand. But yeah, no, that's all I can really say on that.
Yeah, I think, well, look, Tamika and Robas have already said everything, but I'll try to add a little bit. I think definitely like with the Torres Strait, because of our geographical location, you know, we're just a small tiny island just between, if you don't know, North Queensland and Papua New Guinea. So I feel like sometimes issues of climate change in the Torres Strait are not always, they're a bit invisible, like it's not always spoken about. And you know, we have islands like Masig and Boigu. They're already, you know, experiencing a lot of rising sea levels and erosion of their land and everything like that. So we are literally like seeing the effects. And the Torres Strait is part of Australia, but the government doesn't. It's like it doesn't remember us. So, you know, I want to be able to go back home and to, especially as someone that didn't grow up there, I'm, you know, born and raised in Brisbane, like I want to be able to go back home and connect with my culture and my people. All of our stories, our songs, our, you know, our languages, our cultures, it's embedded in the land, it's embedded in the sea. So we have to be there. We can't, you know, have to be one day displaced, you know, internally displaced in our own country. Like it's ridiculous. So I think it's basically what Tamika and Robust were saying, we have to have a voice, you know, that you really need to highlight our voices in this struggle. And yeah, that's probably about it.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I've got a very sort of specific question, but I think this has taken a couple of different shapes, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from with this. So in like the last 18 months, I'd say we've seen a lot of really extreme sort of protests with people, you know, taping themselves to roads and stopping trains and all sorts of things. And I would ask you how you think we can ensure that the fight for climate change doesn't waver or really become distorted because of these types of protests, and how that affects how the public perceive climate change and climate action. It's also a big one.
Yeah, that's a massive question. Yeah, I think the media plays a massive role in painting a narrative, a negative narrative for people that are on the front lines, resisting police and fighting for our land and for country, and for sacred sites. It can be comprehended as a very extreme narrative to society, and the media portrays that. But when it comes to your livelihood and your connection to culture, connection to country, that is something that can be destroyed within seconds and can never be replaced. That is a library of knowledge. Our spiritual places, our birthing sites, places for our next generation to be able to grow up and see and experience for themselves. And I think it's really powerful, that people are on the front lines and defending, these sites. And I think it is really sad that the media paints that negative image, and people see it as an extremist point of view. But I might hand it over to you, Ami or Rob.
Oh.
Okay. Huge question. I think the first thing that popped to my mind was, I believe it was last year, and I'm pretty sure it was Extinction Rebellion, and how they stopped traffic on one of the bridges, and they did it by gluing themselves to, like, they were in a boat, they were in a little canoe. And it ties into what I said before about speaking for us. They were saying, oh, this is for all the Pacific Islanders that are affected by climate change. And then seeing that, I said, not in your little plastic canoe, please don't say that ever. We we are the greatest navigators of the seas. Not in that plastic canoe. We had huge outriggers, massive wakas, was, vase, whatever you want to call it. And you are not going to degrade us to this tiny little, insignificant little thing that you're trying to do. Like I said, we can talk for ourselves. And when we do talk for ourselves, it'll be powerful, and it'll be a way that we know how to do it. So yeah, it's just interesting how people really want to talk for other people, but don't want to give us the opportunity to talk for ourselves. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are often a bit wary of going to protests and rallies and things like that. It's really hard to get, I'm just going to be honest, some of my friends to come along and things like that. Like, I've been asking them for the last 10 years, not even joking, and they still don't come. Sorry, just putting you on blast. But it's just like, people have this sort of idea about what protests are and what happens. And I guess those situations where people were taping themselves up, it does happen. I wouldn't say that it's the majority though. Mostly like protests in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, they're all very peaceful. They have police escorts. Like, it's all very, very well organized. There isn't much to be afraid of or concerned about. Maybe in other countries or places, people can get prosecuted or something can happen to them when they do protest. But here in Australia, it's a bit better in that sense. Like, we get approval from council to have protests and from the police, and we're escorted. So I think it's also about looking throughout history and how direct action, how social movements have actually brought about change. And we can see right now in the US, everyone is rioting and burning buildings and doing all that stuff. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to be extreme like that. When your rights are being denied, when your people are dying in front of you, your family members and stuff like that, you have to be extreme. Who's going to sit there and just be like, like, you've really, it's sometimes you have to be extreme like that, I believe. And definitely, like, Indigenous Australians here have taken a lot of inspiration as well back in the day from the African American civil rights movements, with the freedom rides and stuff like that. Like, there has been a relation there and a connection with Native Americans and also African Americans, in the US. So I don't know, I think we just have to remember that those incidents are just like they're a minority. They don't happen like that all the time. All the protests and all the marches and stuff that I have been going to since I was a child, peaceful. There's no like extreme things like that. So we just, it's like what Tamika said with the media. Like we just have to be wary of the information that's being fed to us, you know? So yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. Seriously, everything you guys have said is resonating with me, and I'm so inspired, and I look up to the three of you so much, and really hope that we can work together in the future. We are sort of coming to the end of this webinar, which is a shame because there's so many more questions to ask, but I would ask the three of you in like 1, 2, 3 lines to leave us with the one thing that you want people to take away from all of this tonight. Really hard to summarize. I know I don't know if I could do it.
Yeah. You go ahead.
No, you go.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I guess just to put it plainly, if you're Pacific Islander and you're tuning in, please come and join us. Join our fight. If you feel any sort of, if you resonated with anything that any of us have said, please reach out. If you're not, do the same. Like we're all in this together. Climate change affects every single one of us. Every single one of us. Some of us is affected more than others, but it affects every single one of us. So just join the movement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, we're working towards a common goal. So the more people power that we can get, you know, the greater the impact it's going to be, not just for our generation, but for the next generation. You know, united we stand, and, you know, stand for something. If you don't stand for anything, what do you stand for? You know, as well, any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mob that are out there, we would love to connect with you at SEED. But also, you know, if you are wanting to learn more about what SEED is and what we do, we'd love to have a yarn. So give us an email.
Yeah, I think obviously we've got a long way to go, but I am excited for the future. I think the youth is very promising, and I'm lucky to know people like Tamika and Robati and, you know, other people from Seed Mob and Pacific Climate Warriors. Like I'm very hopeful for what's to come and the work that all of you guys have been putting in, and other people in our communities, and obviously the people before us who have done all that work as well, and that it's time for us now to take the reins and to step up. But the problem is that people expect one group of people to do all the work, but these issues affect all of us, so you all have to be active. You know, it's no point us just fighting for you, but you're just sitting at home watching the protest on the TV talking about, oh, that's deadly, good on you guys, like where were you, you know? So do it from your heart or don't bother at all. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, I've been thinking about what you guys were saying. I think the thing that I want you guys to take away from it is something that I needed to be reminded of, which is that these movements need all sorts of people. So if you're watching this and wondering how you can get involved, I'm sure there's a way. And my Uncle Greg has always said that we believe in coming together in the circle, and everyone who has an open mind and an open heart has a place with us. So as long as you come to the table and are ready to share your story with us, we'd be willing to share our story with you. That's my little aside for that. I will throw to Joel, who will finish this webinar off. And I'd like to thank our panelists again for sharing so much knowledge and yeah, your cultural experiences with us. It's been really special.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks all of you. I've been honestly blown away by this, and I must admit, my duties of doing Q&A management for Taylor have been a bit slack because I've been taking notes furiously about things you've been talking about, which is a good sign. And my team has also been spamming me with ideas about what we should do going forward based on what you said. So really incredible. And thank you so much. That being said, I'd like to formally thank all of you for being here, giving up your time. And just so people know, Taylor was nervous about being a moderator, but she's clearly phenomenal. and I've decided by myself she'll moderate all of our future events because she's great. So thank you very much for that. It was actually really inspirational. I have to quickly mention Ruby wasn't able to make the call tonight, unfortunately, but she has some incredible things she'd like to say, and we'll get in touch with her and aim to maybe post something after this in coming days to make sure that, you know, her vital contribution will be shared, because I was really looking forward to hearing it too. Thanks to my team as well. It's a massive effort putting in our first online event. We've had no technical issues, which has been great. And I'll say that now because I can jinx it at 6:30, where that late that I can say that. So thanks, Ishara. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Nat. Thanks, everyone. It's been incredible. Also, massive thank you to you for joining us. We ran this for free to try and get as much people as possible. It's an important issue for us and everyone to discuss. We, we just opened up the option for donations to cover the cost of the event. We've been blown away by how many people have chipped in a few dollars each to help us cover that. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Also, please have a look at the links and consider donating some money to the other organizations represented here and all the other cool organizations doing awesome stuff in this space. Coming up, I have to say this, we are a national YP group and there's some awesome stuff happening with our friends and family across the country. To start as WA, our Perth team is having an event on June 9, a global cafe event, which is really interesting. And Victoria, our friends in Melbourne, are looking at foreign aid, where that's working, where that's not, in the coming months. For us, we'll be hosting our World Refugee Day event again end of June. We've had it for a few years in a row now. It's done quite well. So we're looking forward to that. And we're looking after that in July at intergenerational equality, really focusing on COVID, climate change, and looking at what, to steal my own title of this event, what we want from the future. Massively important to us and something I'd like to unpack with some cool experts. So to close, thank you again, everyone. I've been blown away, really inspired by what's happened. Please follow us on the Facebook, Instagram. We really appreciate everyone's support. Consider membership if you are interested in, staying in touch, getting involved with us. And we will be sharing info from all the panel and tonight's events and all the cool organizations as well. So stay engaged, and we'll be looking at this issue again because it's incredibly important. So yeah, finally, thank you to the panel. Thanks Robati, thanks Tamika, thanks Ami, and thanks Taylor for being an awesome MC. And thank you for everyone who came. We know it's a Saturday evening, so thank you for giving part of your free time, but we think it's important. We hope you've taken away something great from this, because I have, and I have a lot of notes for myself to action right now. So thank you very much. Stay in touch. We'd love to see you at the next event.